Now, as we prepare for landing, I hope you've enjoyed the journey so far. This final session is titled Helping Organizations Implement Responsible AI, the Role of Standards, and will be moderated by my colleague Shepard Gonera, a security consultant at Privasec in the Sydney office. Shepard works with our clients to meet their compliance and regulatory requirements. So we'll quickly switch over to Shepard. Hang in there. Thank you, everyone.
Hey everyone, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for that introduction, Vivian. Now, from back in the days of watching iRobot and Minority Report, I've always been curious about the future of artificial intelligence, its impact on our society. And today, lo and behold, with the likes of Siri, Alexa, your banking credentials, artificial intelligence is very much a part of our lives today. So for the very final section, I've got a very quick Q&A session with a lady who works very closely with two of the organizations that are leading global initiatives on the governance of artificial intelligence, the International Standards Organization and the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. I've got with me today Aurelie Jacquet, who is the chair of the committee representing Australia at the International Standard of Artificial Intelligence. And she's also an expert for the IEEE's Ethics Certification Program for Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. Aurelie is also leading the workstream on dignity and agency for identity as part of IEEE's digital inclusion, identity, trust, and agency. Now, she's also a member of the European Artificial Intelligence Alliance and has been recently appointed as a member of the editorial board of Springer's New Journal and Artificial Intelligence and Ethics. Aurelie, good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you, Shepard, for the nice introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and speak at this event. So thank you for having me. And looking forward to talk not only about Minority Report and what's happening in the future, but about what's happening right now with AI.
Oh, that's very true. Thanks for that. Now, look, I've already mentioned my first encounter or my first questioning of ethics, artificial intelligence and businesses was when I watched those two movies back in the day. Aurelie, what is your first encounter with artificial intelligence and actually businesses? How did this big journey start?
Yes, so I should mention I'm a lawyer by background. So my journey with artificial intelligence started with governance. I was looking after algorithmic traders. So what is algorithmic trading? Yep. Pretty much you have trading firms that have developed their own algorithm and automating their trading strategy. So part of my role was to make sure that we had the proper governance in place to ensure those algorithm traders were not causing high risk for the bank I was working for. Did that for 10 years. So so that was pretty much the precursor of depending on your AI definition, they could be considered as AI, but they're not using machine learning. So what I saw at that time, and I've been working with them for 10 years, was effectively what happened when you do not manage your algorithm properly, when you do not risk manage it properly. I also was lucky enough to see the wave of regulation after algo traders that because they didn't have, some of them didn't have proper risk management. I'm not going to remind you of the few financial crises that are associated with algo traders. Pretty much we had a huge wave of regulation. So that lesson that I learned early on is if you don't want the regulators to change your business model substantially, so it is much harder for you to go on with your day-to-day business, be mindful of governance and of in what I call in my business responsible AI and ethical AI. With the algorithmic trading, what was interesting is we had very similar issues with AI issues at our peers, which is the fail-safe can be quite blunt when designing fail-safe for algorithms. So this problem is more acute for AI. We had also question about transparency and proprietary algorithm. Some markets try to ask a participant to publish the algorithm. That didn't work, obviously. And a few compliance with the laws that also were a bit challenged by the use of algorithm, like the intent to trade. How do you prove or evidence that the algorithm had an intent to trade? Becomes more of an issue with machine learning, obviously.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Now you mentioned governance there. Now it's everyone who starts a new job obviously has to jump on the company values, the corporate strategy. Now, do businesses actually consider artificial intelligence as part of their corporate strategy and part of their organizational values, or is it more efficiency and making money?
So AI first, obviously, is definitely becoming more and more of a part of the corporate strategy, most definitely. Whether effectively you look at the ethical implication or the governance depends. It really depends at what stage you are with your implementation of AI system. Let's say the first roadblock to AI adoption is the AI cost. So what you see for companies, the first building block is get the right data, do actually the training, have the right tools to do the training, and the data has the right talents to also be able to put the right goals in the algorithm, and obviously the infrastructure. So that's the first piece.
Okay.
So there's some people that's still in this part of the journey, some organization. Once, which is nowadays, there's a substantial part of companies that are now at the next level, and they're looking at really what is responsible and ethical AI. Again, here, it's looking at governance and risk strategy. The main thing that keeps coming back is performance, bias, fairness. One that's particularly hard for companies to grasp is the impact assessment. That needs to be done to see the impact that the technology will have on the society, because AI, as you will hear, is a socio-technological system.
Yeah.
And the UN's been starting to draw guidelines and push government and companies to consider impact assessment. The main issue, so the two things to consider when about adoption is really, let's say I'll put two different categories. You have the manufacturer of AI and the user of AI. So let's say if you're a manufacturer, you will have to have now generally an ethical board. You will have your ethics principle. It'll be very hard to provide AI services without having the minimum governance piece. If you're a user, what I found is generally what happened is and that's been happening in the last, this is changing, evolving fastly in the next couple of years, is as a user, you always thought the responsibility was on the manufacturer, and now it's shifting, because with AI, let's say the algorithm is learning on your data. So once it's with your data, you're responsible. And where I see possibly the gap and something that's evolving is when you're bringing, let's say, let's take an example. When you're bringing, HR is starting to use an AI system for to process candidates.
Okay, which is a very much an everyday thing now. That's right.
Yes, very much used. So you would start using, so you get the algorithm from the third-party supplier. They provide some guarantees, but effectively, you actually provide the goals. You also may at times do the training. So you provide some parameters, and you're the one deploying the algorithm. So you're responsible for it. And there's a latest change that's happening in the EU, which pretty much at the moment, they're just considering, let's say, a regime of strict liability for AI, which would make the users strongly, if this is passed and developed, then the user of AI will be very keen, well, should be very keen to start looking at appropriate governance at the port when using third-party suppliers' AI system.
Okay, so that actually brings me to my next thought, because you mentioned that the responsibility shifted from the manufacturer to the user. So what role are artificial intelligence standards playing in relation to responsible implementation of artificial intelligence?
So the standards are biased. I'm biased, but the standards from my perspective.
Look, I'm GRC as well, so that's part of my daily Bible.
The advantage, the law are going quite slow, and this is why I entered the world of standards, because within 3-4 years they can produce actually like best practice for AI. That's considered soft law. The big advantage that they have is not only they across industry, they quite wholesome, but they also implemented internationally. What I mean is that they cover data, they cover the algorithm performance themselves, and they also cover what the organizational process. So that's the 3 key pieces you need to look when you look at AI, not just the tool.
Okay.
And so with the standards, it's looking at those 3 Ps. We have now about 47 countries involved. We have about 21 standards that are under development. And the cherry on the cake is we have what's called an AI management system that is being developed.
Okay.
What this means is this is a pathway for certification of AI system. This AI management system is quite well known. You have it for 9001. You can have certification. So what we do is we actually have developed a standard that will enable certification against it, and that's leveraging. We're not reinventing the wheel. Another big advantage of standards that I like, it's leveraging on existing standards that are already in place within an organization.
Oh, okay.
And to be honest, at the moment, well, not just at the moment, but the biggest issue for companies when it comes to implementing the AI principles that are being recognized in many different jurisdictions is there's very little guidance. You have the principles, but how are you going about those principles? Okay. And there's various initiatives that are looking at different aspects of those principles. There's a number of private auditing initiatives that are being launched. But the standards is both the ISO and also, I have to say, the IEEE initiatives, both of them are actually looking across a number of countries. So they've got, and they have international recognition. So
it sounds very exciting. And when you mention ISO standards, I feel like in the future, the artificial intelligence ISO is going to be sort of like one of those big things like the 27 and 1 now. Now, do you have any leading industries that are leading this response by artificial intelligence?
So when I first got into AI about 2016, the first one so the standards are not released yet. So we're still in process. So there's industries that contributes to it. A number of industry and the strengths of it, it's like we have government, academia, users and manufacturers. So it's like quite broad. So that's also the added value of, we have about over 150 experts internationally looking at those standards. But back to your question, if I have to think about who was first looking at those ethical and responsible AI problem, the first one that came to me was the startups, because the reason for that was they were asked by the users, how do I make sure that your AI is ethical? So there's the first one that we're looking at. If I'm making a recommendation, is that nudging appropriate? How do I know that my recommendation is fair? So that was the initial question that we received here in Australia. Obviously, the the big tech have been tackling it since 2015. I think the partnership of AI was founded back in 2017. So, and they've been developing tools in relation to bias. Facebook, their research arm, just released an open library to enable to preserve privacy when using AI. So, as I said, they're doing quite a fair bit of work on those issues. Another industry that's particularly good, obviously, is health, but for the good reason that they are effectively dealing with people on a day-to-day basis. They already have their ethics committee and they have like strong procedures. So when, let's say, they are experimenting on the data rather than the people, they've already got this process in place.
That's good. Yeah. Now, look, just to close it up, you mentioned two industries that are of interest to me, not only to me, but in the news. We hear about them. You mentioned healthcare and you mentioned social media at large. Now, what are some typical risks, or what are some cases that you've experienced or come into with organizations that would have been helped, or what risks would have been resolved if artificial intelligence responsibility had been implemented, or if these companies had applied the standards sort of forethought? What risks do you think would have been resolved by applying the standards?
So maybe I'll just give you a quick overview of what the standard's doing, and then of the issues. So the standards, you've got 6 working group. They focus on data, trustworthiness, governance, and computational approach to AI. And they've got also a going through use cases to have a bit of an idea of the life cycle of AI system. And we have a definition ontology group. So in the trustworthiness piece, we are looking at, let's say, bias, risk management, robustness of neural network, and effectively the model performance. So if you look at all this, let's pick the most common headlines for AI. If you think about the Twitter Tay chatbot that's been quoted, you would have the right governance in place to make sure that you monitor your AI system. You've obviously make sure that you test the data on which it's learning, so you see if the data set on which it's learning is appropriate. In that case, do not put it with the lesson learned was to not really have it on a live chat on Twitter, or maybe just find more appropriate goals so that you do not follow all the chats. So that could have been avoided. For Compass, obviously articulate to be able to determine what bias. So the Compass case, made the headlines pretty much all over the world. It was algorithms that was used to make recommendation to judges on how to sentence people to prison. Not to sentence, to decide whether they could be released or not. And it there was ProPublica audited them, and it was found that it was highly discriminatory, and Black people were at a higher risk score, and were therefore were told, well, the risk score shows the judge that Black people were more likely to reoffend than white people. So that bias piece, we most aware and what's the right calculation for the bias, for the notion of fairness. That's consideration that are very much happening right now. So that's the benefit of looking at governance and addressing those issues. So it's good risk management, impact assessments, but also obviously articulating identifying the bias and identifying for a company being able to identify the unwanted bias that they have. So from my perspective, if I've got one message to give from the standards, it gives you that best practice that you will need very shortly, because as I say, if you look at the regulators, what they're doing right now is starting to ask what companies, if they have an AI governance or AI risk strategy in place. They're also to start looking at strict liability, as I mentioned. So the legal vacuum is disappearing less and less. And obviously, there's some test cases that are currently underway. If you look at the privacy regulators, they're already litigating companies that have used and deployed AI system. Similarly, the competition regulator is also very active on this front. Yeah. So from my perspective, that's where standards can help.
Okay. Look, Aurelie, you've mentioned in this very last question quite a number of topics that I'm very passionate about, and I do feel we actually need a bit more time than we have today. So before I open the Pandora's box, I'll close it up for today and say thank you very much. But we'll definitely be trying to see if we can organize a bigger session for this, because as you said, it's an open world that we can take a bit of time to talk about and discuss. So thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you very much for joining PRIVACON. What I'll do is I'll hand back to Vivian, and she'll close off PRIVACON conference for us. Thanks, Aurelie.
Thank you, Shepherd. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
All right, thanks, everyone. Bye.
Wow, that was definitely a ride. Ladies and gentlemen, as we approach the landing and the end of today's event, on behalf of the PRIVACON crew, I'd like to thank you all for being a part of this journey. The aims of this conference were high, and your presence today shows a strong commitment from the international cybersecurity community to continuously learn, exchange insights, and engage in meaningful discussions that will help us better understand and tackle the advancing cyber risk challenges faced across industry sectors. In particular, our gratitude goes to the panelists and speakers for sharing their expertise with us. I'm sure the audience took note with a great interest of your valuable insights. I personally did. Last but not least, we would like to thank our conference partners and supporters for their immense contribution to the organization of today's proceedings. So how did we go? You will all receive a post-event survey shortly. Please continue to show your support by sharing your feedback. We also look forward to continuing today's conversations via our social media channels. From me and the crew, it's goodbye for now, and see you all next week. Thank you. Take care.